and any extra comments that I shared with you, and then reminds them that we are approaching the end of the first quarter. We hope that they find this information helpful. The counselor and the administrator are listed there as well, and those are hyperlinked emails that they can go through, so they can find all the people that can help them in this information that we gather and send to them. I'm going to jump back for a second to our presentation and talk about some of our academic issues and interventions a little further. Again, this is where we looked at the number of failing students and the number of failing courses. So in quarter one, 795 students were taking 1,409 courses. 311 students had failing grades in 445 courses. So some of them had more than one failing class. You can see the percent change there over that. And then for quarter two as well, we started out with the number of failing students at the interim, and then at the end of the term, the percent change. As I said, we did a little better getting their attention and getting them to move during the first quarter than they did in the second quarter. We have a quarter recovery for our students, and so all of those students are identified. If they did not pass the course, they have an opportunity at the end of the course to go back and try to make up the content that they did not get. And if they have a grade of, they can then change their grade to a 60 for the quarter. If they had a failing grade, it gets them to a passing level. That's important because when a student fails miserably during the first quarter, and their grade, their numeric grade is such that they mathematically can't possibly pass the second quarter, they're in a hopeless situation. And so they often find themselves unable to do anything. So if they can go back, we use our Edmentum software to put together information based on the standards that they need to work on, so they can go in and do that quarter recovery and make up that content to try to bring their grade back to 60, which puts them back in the game mathematically for second quarter to be able to move that. Credits lost to FAs. I think you saw about our improvement in our attendance here at school. One of the things that I realized very quickly when I came on board back in 2018 as principal at the school is that we had a problem with students not being in their classroom, whether they were tardy or skipping class or absent from school, whatever that was. I co-opted the phrase butts in seats. I think we took that from the sports marketing people. They want to get butts in seats. We want butts in seats in our classroom because we know that when the students are in front of their teachers, that's our best chance to make sure that we can educate them and move them where we want to go. And so we tightened up in our school looking at the process of failure due to absences. And so students maybe who had missed so many days that they were no longer eligible to gain credit for that course. We've set up a program for them where they can come to seat time recovery, work through that. We also, using a similar process that I showed you just a moment ago, we're able to track that information and share that. So once again, talking to teenagers who sometimes are not as focused as they should be, we're able to drag them back in and get them to where they need to be there to do that. So in total, over the semester, 81 students lost a total of 156 credits for not being in there. So even as we've been working hard and improving over the years, we still had a lot of students not quite make it due to their FA, and 19 of those students lost the opportunity to participate in credit recovery due to receiving that FA. So the process we use to track that and keep up with that, our FA reports are generated weekly, and notification emails, like we said before, there's a mail merge email that goes out. Students, parents, teachers, and counselors all get that information. So everybody is on the team understanding what needs to be done so the student can't get out of the doing the work. We have seat time recovery offered before school on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm sorry, that should be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, not on Wednesday. And we have evening school on Tuesday and Wednesday from 4 to 7, where they can come at either of those times and track time towards making that up and getting credit recovery. We do student conferences and parent phone calls from the faculty, letting them know. We have internal audits that we're doing constantly to keep track of that. And so if we jump back in, similar, the FA situation, this is what the mail merge for an FA student looks like. Again, it's sent to the student and his parent or her parent. Any absence in excess of 10 days, it explains the coding there based on the state rule for failure due to attendance. And then it shows in each of their courses which courses they have missed classes in and owed time in. This particular student owed time in all 4 of their courses. Some students, it may just be 1 class or 2 classes. There is a hyperlink put in there to sign up for seat time during this week or to sign up for seat time during the next week. So there's really no excuse once you've read the email not to get in gear and go ahead and set yourself up to be ready to get that fixed. We list all of those absences there as well and the coding for that absence. So they can find, occasionally we have students come to us and explain that they think their absence is miscoded and they want to get that corrected. And so this gives an opportunity to see what we officially have in our system and get that fixed. We also point out those things that do not count against that. We have a document here on the bottom again that talks about our state rule for attending class and what you have to do. And of course, we understand that things come up. If there's a problem and your child is not able to be at school and you feel like you need relief from that, we do have a system where they can reach out to me as principal and look for help in getting out of that. We also look at our FA list teacher sample. Here, this is what's sent to every teacher. And so we asked those teachers, not only did we email it to the parents and the students, but we emailed all the teachers and said, look, this particular Algebra 1 teacher has 6 students who are in FA status. We've asked you to speak privately to each of those students that are in your classes and make sure they understand that they need to be going to seat time recovery to get back on track. And then also the counselors, for each counselor, we run their list based on their student alpha group and which of their students have FA status. So as well, they can speak to the students and encourage them to do that. Jumping back here in the presentation, we talked about the HISI response and what we're doing there. One of the major things that we did as we moved into this system, and we feel like we have been strong in making a difference here. In the past, we may not have noted immediately that a student was in danger of not matriculating to the next grade level. For a while in our state, based on how things were laid out, without this high school student success indicator as part of the equation, really the finish line at the end of 4 years is what mattered. Did we get them there by the end of the 4 years? Now we're looking that they get all of the credits needed each year and that they include the appropriate credits, the number of English, math, science, social studies as they go through the years. So we have all of our teachers finalize their grades at the end of semester 1, which is before our winter break. And then our MTSS team was sequestered for the first 2 days of the semester, and they went through every one of those students who might not have made the mark, might have failed a course that was important for them to pass during first semester. We took a look at that, and we realized as we went through that data, there's probably 4 or 5 buckets that those students that did not pass might fall into. But if they were eligible for a credit recovery situation, or if they could be re-enrolled in the class and that was the best case for that student, we could reschedule them and do that. And so we were able to put all of those students that needed another try to stay on track back in there, because we know with the high school student success indicator that once you begin digging that hole as a freshman, if you don't get back on track, that hole deepens in their sophomore year, junior year, and so on as they go, because the number of credits keeps accruing regardless of what they're passing. And so it's important for us to find them early and get them back on class or back on task. And then we want to make sure that we've balanced those classes out as well, so the teachers aren't getting a class full of students who are repeaters. We move that around and try to make that work for them, and so they have an opportunity to be successful. If the student was eligible for credit recovery, we determined if that was something that we could schedule them in during the day, or if maybe they needed to do that with evening school. Sometimes some of our older students who may be falling behind, they need to keep getting their credits during their daytime classes, the 4 courses they would be assigned second semester. And so we may look at doing a credit recovery option for them during our evening schools. And then our student concern specialists on our MTSS team, they're continually meeting with these students. They've flagged themselves and identified themselves, not only through our spreadsheet where we pulled all of this, but we have identified these students and are meeting with them constantly. I have a lady that works for us who is a mother of students in our school, and she's particularly successful in this role because she understands how to be a nagging mom. And so that's what we're looking for, is somebody to put their arm around these students and drag them in and insist that they get the work done. In case somebody's not doing that in that child's household, I know that Ms. Murfeld is going to be doing that in our school and making that happen. And so we're trying everything we can to wrap around those most vulnerable students and make sure that they have all the supports they need to make that up. Wind testing, similarly, that's one of our marks that we use when we're doing our college and career readiness. We feel like we're pretty strong with our scores on our school report card for college and career readiness. And one of the major factors we do for that is the wind testing. We also look to retest our seniors who may not have made the mark through wind testing or any other manner in their senior year. They didn't get it in their junior year. And so we look at those and find who are the bubble students, who are those students who would benefit from taking a retake and perhaps doing this. Of course, we look at all the particular paths that are available to a student to become college or career ready. We personally feel like our students that are graduating from our high school, we should have a near 100% rate, at least for career ready, and then a strong college rate as well. So we want to be looking at that and continuing to improve as we have on our school report card. But that's one thing that we delve into as well as we audit our situation and make sure we're putting these opportunities in front of the kids, whether it's a completer path through their CTE coursework or whether it's through the wind testing or an ASVAB test, especially for those career ready opportunities. And then we find that most of our college ready students and of course our college bound students are doing that. Occasionally we do find as well that we have college bound, clearly successful students that are college bound, and I've had several conversations over the years with parents whose children have been accepted to college. They're on their way, but somewhere along the way they didn't check that mark for a career ready. They didn't do one of the things that requires this. And so, we have to explain that it's not that we don't believe your child would be unsuccessful in a career or couldn't be successful in career, but we're looking at these data marks that the state is going to pull and do that. And so we need your student to do one of those things, whether it's an ASVAB. We've talked many times about the ASVAB is not just a military test, but it is an aptitude test. It shows what students have an affinity for, what they excel at, and really anybody could benefit from the data that gives you back. And so maybe that's an opportunity that some of those students could take. Also, our EOC review. This is just a sample that I threw in as well. In addition to all the spreadsheet stuff and nerdy numbers that we see, our teachers are talking in their PLCs about what we're doing, and that's important. The teachers are where the rubber meets the road. We got to figure out what's going on and what we're doing. And so you see some notes here with the Algebra 1 exam. It was tough as we went into this data round. We had some math helper classes for our students that were not or deemed not quite ready for Algebra 1, but with the loss of a teacher literally 3 days before school started, we lost a teacher and had to shuffle that and weren't able to offer one of those helper classes in math. So that took a hit. We had some students we had to push on to algebra maybe before we felt like they were ready. And then we were super proud that we eventually, we may or may not be a little bit competitive. It's not really about competing with the other schools, but of course, good-natured bragging rights for the principals in our district, we like to look. And so when I came to this school, we were on the bottom in our algebra scores out of the 3 schools in our district. And we finally made it on top. We steadily improved each year and made it to that top level. And so we've worked really hard, and I feel like the teachers have been really focused on figuring out what we can do to improve. Like we said, those swimmers that are shaving the hair off their legs to get just a little bit faster, how are we going to lean forward and get just a little bit further? So notes there from what the math teacher said. Likewise, our English 2 teachers in that EOC, they went through, identified some of the struggling points for them, our greatest need for our students learning how to articulate their thoughts through written expression. And so they've worked on how we can do that, which teachers are being successful with that, and what tools are they using that we could share across the board and learn to move better on that. Again, similarly with biology, we want to move to a more inquiry-based instruction in our science classes. We find that that's typically more successful for our students. We don't want to be lecturing that, but also we want to make sure that our science class has opportunities to do exercises that reflect the way they're tested in their tested subjects as well. They think that in biology that's often a little more difficult because it doesn't look like it looks on a standardized test when they do it in their classroom. They got better ways to teach it than the way we have to put it in the standardized test. So it's important that we also cover what that looks like. And again, U.S. history as well, making sure that we work on application, extracting the information, and understanding what's important, not just recall in history classes, really working towards that and moving for improved performance there as well. So that's a smattering of some of the things we do. I'm happy to take questions and answer to the best of my ability anything that I might have talked about or other questions you have about maybe something I didn't mention.
Thank you very much. A lot of information there. I think you got most of my questions, but Representative Collins has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for coming. First, congratulations on your award.
Thank you so much.
And the work that you're doing, just thank you. So I'm a nerd. I loved your Excel sheet. And percolating to the top for me is the absences. I'm assuming absences are, especially for a high school, you have probably 1/3 of your students that are over 20 days.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head if that's true or not. I remember that this is period-based attendance in high school too, which skews this. A lot of times we think about school and we do daily attendance most likely in most elementary situations. And then when we start to talk period-based attendance, it really makes the numbers look crazy if you're not ready to see that, because a student may have missed a lot. They may have decided they've given up on their fourth period class and they leave school every day and don't stay in their fourth period. They're 18 years old, they can drive, and they left. And so that can really ramp up numbers, yet they were in attendance perhaps for their first, second, and third period. So it's very difficult to give general statements as to what the problems are. But we do have a lot of students that miss a lot of days.
Well, I'm assuming, so was that 81 FAs? Were those the true numbers for, I guess, this year or last year, of only 81 high school students in your high school
Yes.
2350 that are?
Yes. So with all of our interventions, we brought that FA status down to only 81 out of 1,250 students. I'm sorry, out of 2,350 students. Didn't make it.
Okay. And of those 81, I guess let's take it back 1 year. Did you have any that were taken to any sort of truancy?
Yes, sir. We have one person in our school, one of our secretaries at the school, whose full-time job is to work on truancy. She actually works with home-based students as well, but truancy and home-based. We're tracking all of that. We have PCIC meetings with those students who are in default of our attendance policy. We document and we do push to take to court. A lot of times the court system is a bit slow. It doesn't react as quickly as maybe we need it to get the effort we need. It seems to take a long time before a student actually lands in court. But we do have, I would say, anywhere from half a dozen to 24 each year that end up pushing that far.
And that seems like a lot in the sense of good.
Yeah.
I'm trying to thread the line here. And of those truancies, are any of those then later gone to contempt?
Occasionally we have one or two make it to contempt. Most often going to truancy court does get their attention and they straighten up for a while.
Okay. And those, let's say 81, just because we're thinking of the same thing, of those 81, with the 24 that are going to truancy court, do they typically pass to the next grade?
So now that we have, as I mentioned in the presentation, we did not historically think of passing grade to grade, almost like college. It become almost like college in high school. You might be in a class, especially elective classes, with students of all grade levels. And so we often talked about your grade level isn't really important as long as you meet the mark by the end of your 4 years to graduate. And now that we have the HISI document and what we're tracking, we're in our 3rd year of tracking that, moving up to having the full school being looked at in that manner. And so this is the 3rd year and also my 8th year at the school. So really only 2 of those 7 prior years, which also included COVID, which was a disaster on all fronts. Mm-hmm. So I'm not certain where that comes or what that was, because we didn't typically care so much that they matriculated from freshman to sophomore.
Okay. Last question. So your Excel sheet, and this is my ignorance, would power schools, or there's no programming that would do what it seems like you're doing very manually?
Yeah, so there is some software that's out there that can pull a lot of this data and do that. Our school has invested in Panorama brand software. In the last 2 years, I think we've had that tool. Prior to that, we didn't. And so Brent was doing most of this manually. And in fact, his school laptop that he was issued, you could almost see the smoke coming off of it when he ran that report. It literally took more than 30 minutes for the information to process and pull through. So he was moving a lot of data into a spreadsheet to manage it. And honestly, after building and understanding what he was doing while he used Panorama when it came online for us, he had a lot of confidence in his program as well, and so continued to use that. So we're leaning more on the Panorama side of things this year because the person that's taken over for Brent is not the math mind or the Excel mind that he was. She has an English background, wonderful relational person with the students, but she just doesn't get that spreadsheet piece.
And sorry, last question, I promise. So when you have a reduction in your absences, you're relating that to this system of tracking it, having teacher intervention, having administration intervention, and then recovery. Is that what you would say?
Absolutely, and there's thousands of reasons why students aren't in school. I know that this commission has worked on information about what's going on there and trying to get to the bottom of it. Like I said, that's been a priority for me for the 8 years I've been principal of the school. And it's a moving target. Every student is different. We don't create widgets in education, and so every student's situation is different. But we do feel like the awareness, tracking that, being on top of it, building that relationship with the student, as I showed you in the one form, where we'd had about 15 connections with the student to make sure, because sometimes they're not listening and they need to be told repeatedly. Anybody that's had a teenager understands that.
Yes, Superintendent Weaver.
I just wanted to say, Principal Aldridge, congratulations on making the scoreboard visible. That's something that Stephen Covey talks about all the time, and what you all have done to pull this together in a way that's actually actionable for your team, the collaborative PLC type approach that you're taking to it, the way that you're engaging and informing parents and creating ownership in the students of their own outcomes is just incredibly commendable. And I just want to say a thank you to the EOC as well for what you've done to really platform this issue of data trailblazing. And to thank you all for your partnership. So we actually at the department have just launched the Palmetto Pathways, which has received great acclaim from our superintendents, principals, and counselors, because what we're trying to do is equalize the opportunity at every school to have these type of tools. And so all I know is we're going to be calling on you, Trip, to be a consultant for this project as we go forward, because you clearly have platformed incredible best practices here at Fort Dorchester. So thank you for that.
Happy to help. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. How many full-time employees do you have that do MTSS, or are some of those volunteers?
It's all full-time employees. Right now, from my admin team, I have 1.5. I have one main assistant principal that leads the team. I have a secondary assistant principal who typically looks at younger students, freshman, sophomore situations, as they haven't gotten as serious at that point as we get to know the students, so they're not as involved. I have a secretary and another teacher assistant level teacher, Miss Murfield, that I talked about, that's our nagging mom. She is there as a student concern specialist doing that. And then 2 of our 10 counselors are dedicated solely to working in this P&I team, and the other 8 counselors deal with the rest of the school to do that. So that's 2 counselors, 2 administrators, and 2 classified staff. We also, of course, work closely with our special needs teachers, our school psychologist, and our support staff member that works with homebound and truancy issues is often involved in the process as well.
Okay, thank you. And one other quick question. The seat time, students sign up for the seat time, the
Yes, ma'am.
morning seat time? And how is that monitored? Are the teachers responsible for sending work to them, the students responsible for bringing their own work? I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah, so the students are ultimately responsible for what they need to do. The opportunity where we're sharing with the teachers and saying, hey, you've got these students, please talk to them and make sure they're getting their seat time. the idea is that they're encouraging to do something worthwhile in that seat time. We have not figured out the ace in the hole to make sure we guarantee what they're doing in seat time is the best that they could be doing. But the idea is that, anybody that's there coaching that is asking them to look for missing work or work that they might need to redo or something of that sort. It's monitored through either teachers in our after-school seat time setup, and then we have one of our support staff members that monitors the before school seat time as well. We have a unique schedule with our tiered busing in our district. High schools are the third tier, and our students do not start school until 9:30 in the morning. So with our staff on campus by 8 a.m., it's easy for us to do an 8:15 to 9:15 and have those students in there in the morning as well to get that done. Also with school letting out at 4 o'clock, we don't do much at all after school except for those 2 days of evening school.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Barton, you look like you're burning with a question over there.
Well, I just want to say what you've done by setting up a system, because I think you have a system that makes sure all students are taken care of. And that system has data that informs instruction, which I think is so important for the teachers. They understand. It's a focus that I haven't seen much at a high school. I'm going to say that. So I really value what the system that you've created and the fact that you've done it so well. And it all starts with the leader. So, I mean, from the bus system to the instruction to everything's tied together because you know what the goal is. And so I think that's the main reason you won this is you can measure what you're doing.
Yes, ma'am.
So may I, on behalf of Governor McMaster, so I work for Governor McMaster, so I just want to thank you for this. And he has a letter for you congratulating you and your faculty and your staff for all that you do for
Awesome.
education.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead on, make the presentation.
Thank you. You want me to come around?
Yes. Oh, most stuff.
Yes, sir.
Again, congratulations on
Thank you.
your award. Good to see you, Madam Superintendent. I was in your presentation, at Excel in Eddie, New Orleans there, when you represented well about telephones in the school and the impact that it had. Good to see you. Tell me again, how do you utilize that evening school?
So evening school, we run our seat time recovery concurrently with evening school, and then those students who are in need of additional help. So through our MTSS team, if we've identified or if a particular teacher, the individual teachers have the autonomy to suggest that a student come back for that evening school. We've also run concurrently in that group. We have our ML, multilingual learner population. We do a special tutoring for them as well with our professionals that work in the ML group. And so any of those students can be encouraged or recommended to come. Students can self-nominate themselves and decide they need help. But essentially, it just gives us an academic overtime, if you want to call it that, in the evening where they can get additional help.
They're not. Are they mandated to come, or just
It's not
an
mandated.
alternative?
It's not mandated. It's just we encourage that if the
good.
student needs extra help, we can't make them stay.
I think that's a good thing. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Congratulations again.
Thank you so much. We're so
Great.
proud of this and appreciate the recognition. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your time and coming to share with all of us. We really appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, next up, I'm going to call on Dr. Tate to give the report from the ASAA subcommittee. She has 2 information items and some action items as well, I believe. So, Dr. Tate?
All right, thank you. The EOC Academic Standards and Assessment Subcommittee met on November 17th, and we have 2 information items and 1 action item. The committee received an update on the South Carolina School Report Card. This year's release showed growth. The number and percentage of schools receiving overall ratings of excellent and good increased. The number increased from 549 in 2024 to 623 in 2025. The number of schools receiving an overall rating of unsatisfactory went down. In the 2025 release, only 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 14 high schools scored an overall rating of unsatisfactory. And a few items of note, the 2025 report cards marked the 2nd year of full implementation of the added value growth model for the student progress indicator. The 1st year on track to graduate, the 2nd year on track to graduate metric, and the 5th year student success rate metric were scored this year in the high school student success indicator. As part of their gradual rollout, the 3rd year on track to graduate metric is reported on 2025 report cards, but will not be scored into the 2026 report cards. And the Preparing for Success indicator was calculated and reported on the 2025 report cards for elementary or middle school after a 1-year delay. And for most schools, this impacts 1 grade level and includes only science. All right. The second information, the subcommittee also received an update on the CTE data project. The EOC contracted out with Transform South Carolina and is working with SREB and the Riley Institute. The full EOC will receive a full report of the work in February of 2026. And then the subcommittee took action on the cyclical review of the South Carolina Social Studies standards. At this time, I would like to call Dr. Knight to the podium to review the recommendations approved by the ASA subcommittee.
Be brief as we go through. This was just the statutory, this is all in your packet, but this is just the statutory responsibilities. Overview of the process, we had 9 national experts that met through a Zoom call, I think in July, and then they had reports to submit to us. I received 6 of the 7. The 7th had very good conversation in July, but did not receive the report. We had 34 state individuals, and those were teachers, community members, business people, administrators, social studies experts, et cetera, that were nominated by the legislators, by EOC members, by state board members. And they were a really good group. We really appreciate their work. We met 3 days, and they submitted their recommendations by grade level. Excuse me. The only state assessment that we can provide on social studies is U.S. history. And I wanted to provide data from you since COVID. We still don't have quite half the students making A, B, and C, and quite a large number of percent making an F in U.S. history. Just briefly, these are some of the commendations by the state panels. They thought the alignment guides that the department has done were very helpful, content appropriate. They thought the inclusion of civics and government in the early grade was essential, and so on. Recommendation, these are on page 15. They were national and they were state recommendations, and so it's sometimes an arduous task to try to pull those together, but this is what we did in social studies. And I will say that the State Department of Education social studies experts were there, and I call them experts because they're content specific and assessment specific, and they really were great. They worked very well. I encouraged them to come sit in with the high school, middle school, and elementary groups, answer questions that they may have, and if there was any feedback they needed to. So it was a really tight group that we worked with. Recommendations. Consider framing United States history and Constitution and world history within a time frame to assist teachers with contextual lens. They encouraged the department to look at AP World History, Government, U.S. History frameworks, not the content necessarily, but just how they were framed. Ensure students have historical context and background knowledge on a standard. Consider the removal of the state budget proviso that suspends testing and social studies in grades 3 through 8. That really should say in grades 5 and 7. Prior to the suspension, students were tested in social studies in grades 5 and 7. Currently, we're doing U.S. history in 11th grade. Develops a civics strand from grade kindergarten through 12. They thought a lack of understanding of foundational civics and cultural understanding was lacking. Address the redundancy in the content across grade levels, and that will certainly assist teachers in the number of standards they have to teach. Provide access to teachers for primary sources in all history classes. We've got a great learning object repository, the lower, or instructional hub, as it's called. So just make sure that those materials are in that hub. Address the lack of diversity, especially regarding gender with disabilities, persons with just disabilities, and ethnicities within the standards. Standards should focus more on a global perspective. Prioritize what has been identified as essential for all students to know. Again, trying to condense the number of standards that teachers have to teach within a given year, because history just grows. I mean, it's not stagnant. Improve the rigor by benchmarking social studies against international standards using the U.S. standards and world-class education by Achieve, and then the International Blueprint Education Commission of the States. The guy was just here. And then using the C3 framework, which is a national framework for social studies, it's specifically good at the progression of skills throughout the grade levels. There was an expectation for students to think like an historian, interpret economy as an economist, thought that maybe these were not developmentally appropriate, and maybe go back and have students use in the early grades, particularly drawing upon maps, stories, timelines, and then in the middle grades, using cause and effect, and finally in high school, to reason like experts by analyzing evidence and evaluating interpretations. It's kind of going back to the progression of skills. And then standards should use common language to communicate to teachers and parents. Greater specificity should be provided in the standards and alignment guide to answer the question, what can a teacher expect a student to know at a specific grade level? I thought it was kind of broad. They love the alignment guides. And then finally, the alignment guide, a strong alignment document to assist teachers in the teaching of standards is needed and should be incorporated into the standards. Greater alignment between the two documents were proved to be beneficial, and they gave Kentucky as a state to look at, where they have the standards, which are broad, and then the alignment guide, which are more concrete, if you will, a greater focus, so that teachers at every grade level, at every school, you would expect them to be teaching content that is similar. You teach it differently, but content is there. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are questions.
Martin, do you have a question?
Yeah, one question, Rainey. So once this is approved, it of course goes to the department. They've been working with you on this. What's the timeline for the social studies standards?
Well, my ask Superintendent Weaver, I will tell you, they typically convene a writing team who writes, and it's a very arduous process. Then they have a time for public view. State board approves it twice, have 2 readings, and then it comes to the EOC for final approval. Now, Ms. Superintendent Weaver, if you'll remember the timeline.
Yeah, the way that it's currently laid out, so we currently have a nomination process open right now for the Standards Writing Committee. We'll be working with that committee throughout the spring to get them trained up. The writing itself actually happens late spring over the summer. with the goal that then during the fall would be a public comment period. The goal would be to have it before the state board in January of 27, with final approval by the state board by late spring of 27. And so that's the current timeline that we're working on. What I'll tell you all is that my commitment to this committee is that we're going to get it right. I think you recall that when we were doing the ELA standards writing, we went back and redrafted because after public comment, and feedback from the EOC specifically, we realized that we needed to strengthen those. And so our commitment is that we're going to be getting this right. And I think this is an incredible opportunity for South Carolina to lead the country in high quality, content-based civics education and social studies. And so that's our goal, is that at the end of this process, South Carolina is going to be at the front of the pack when it comes to teaching our students what they need to know about self-government and about our history here in South Carolina.
And I assume, Superintendent Weaver, forgive me if this is an ignorant question, but it's during that writing alignment, if I'm using the right terminology, is when the team is also looking at maybe using these sources, but also what are the end of course standards that a student's going to be assessed on, but also what SAT and ACT are using that are indicators, and obviously we want our students to do as well as they can, so we want to teach them what they need to know, but also for colleges and universities.
Yes, there's tons of integration that goes into this work. So we're looking not only at the standards writing process, we're going to be looking at the alignment of resources. That was something that was specifically highlighted in the recommendation, is how does the department actually integrate the content resources that make it easier for teachers to teach the standards. So that work is going to be happening concurrently. And then of course the assessment is also part of that process, again, with the assumption that we know we have the 11th grade end of course exam and the open question about whether or not South Carolina will ever reinstate the social studies testing in the younger grades, which I would be a proponent of.
And I've shared this with Superintendent Weaver before. When she and I were over at Annie Burnside doing the school report card release, one of the talking to the team there in that school, one of the big things that they complimented the state on was just the clarity now, like there's a broad list of information and standards that are produced, but kind of this alignment guide and making it, giving them some real targeted pathways to follow so they understand what exactly children are going to be tested on and how to apply those. They were very complimentary of that. They said, we're not having to guess.
And that's
basically.
Exactly. We have a template now with ELA and math, and we need to apply that same template to social studies. And what I'll say specifically about social studies is that, the critical thinking skills are absolutely essential, but students have to know content to be able to think critically about it. And so we have to make sure that we are spiraling content, threads of geography, threads of civics throughout our standards from the very beginning, so that there is a coherent progression that by the time students get to U.S. history and government in 11th grade, they already have some kind of foundational understanding of how our government is structured and of our U.S. history. And so I think what you'll hopefully see at the end result of our writing process is a much more streamlined, coherent document that is a progression that builds throughout all of the grades, as opposed to having just a discrete bit of information here and another piece of information here.
Mr. Collins, you have a question? Comment?
More of a comment, and I guess more for Dr. Knight, but and let me back up a little bit. I am a political science major. I'm working on a master's in government. So obviously I think U.S. history and social studies is, in my mind, it's more important than math and science. I know that's probably a minority opinion, but I'd rather somebody on Facebook be able to know government and be civic-minded and nice instead of being able to write it. So with that background, also though, I do not like testing, and we just went through 5 or 6 years ago a huge statewide effort of reducing state testing. And, just like everything we do in education, we take one step one way and then just the next year we reverse course and go the other way. And what that tells me is not that I get it. They're not going to teach it unless it's tested. I hear that. But is that not the actual problem, not the testing part of it? I think the actual problem is we incentivize not making it a priority, even though there's a good chunk that think it is very important, instead of just let's test it so that they have to do it. There's just got to be a better way, in my opinion, than just doing the testing part of it. And I think that answer is more complex. And let's talk about what this accountability measures what truly are. Why are we incentivizing things? And principals and teachers focus on the good instead of focus on whatever stupid report card is. So I don't know where the question is there, other than I know this is going to come before me, and I want people to understand the history of this. That I'm just a little, until convinced otherwise, testing is not always the answer for me.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm going to follow up on Representative Collins because I served on the accountability that's coming next. And I will tell you one of the top complaints we're getting now from parents of elementary school students is their children are receiving no science or social studies instruction at all during the school day. So I totally agree with Representative Collins. We've got to ensure that it's taught without over-testing students. I get that. Mm-hmm. One of the things I think that we would be looking at as these standards are being written is, can we add questions to the ELA test that would include questions, so we but we could see if it's being taught. So really good, or writing prompts where you have to know the knowledge of social studies to be able to answer that. And maybe, science we have to test because of the federal laws, but it's a thought for social studies. Can we be creative to figure out how to do what we're already doing, maybe make the test 15 minutes longer, 20 minutes longer, to get that information, or doing audits of school districts. That's even more time consuming though. But the big thing is, how do we ensure it's being taught? That's what we're trying to do.
And Melanie, I think you hit on something really important there, which is the integration, especially in those early grades, because we already know that our teachers have so much on their plate, but why can't we integrate civics, science, and other content that we want students to know into our ELA standards? And so that may be an additional line of work to look at down the road in terms of how we actually, especially in those younger grades, are merging social studies and ELA standards.
Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I had a couple questions and a couple of comments. First of all, I think the recommendation report is really sound in most areas. I think they're pretty on target with everything. I did have a question about number 11 that said the expectations for students to think like a historian or interpret like an economist are not developmentally appropriate in most grades. I disagree pretty strongly with that. Because it is about developing critical thinking skills from the time children are small, in kindergarten, first grade, but using the content to think about it, not just regurgitate facts. So I definitely think young students can think and use those progression of skills that have been developed actually by the State Department, and which are literacy skills. They are thinking skills, comparison, contextualization, cause and effect, and use the content. So that's one thing I would be really careful with number 11, because what we don't want is it just to go back to rote memory in the early grades. The second thing I wanted to ask about, and this is just from dealing with this in a district from a long time, we do not have state standards for psychology or sociology, and teachers in all of our high schools are teaching those courses. And happens is they usually use some form of like national standards, but that does not carry from school to school and definitely not district to district. So there are still 2 courses that we do have standards for, Old Testament and New Testament, which I really think is not, I know that it's not taught in Charleston in any of our schools right now. If that is going to be on the table for revision, if they could maybe consider, and we have psychology teachers and sociology teachers all the time requesting a possibility of having standards developed like that. Now, if the ones that do take AP psychology, I mean, they use College Board's syllabus, but I feel like that's a big need that we have had for a long time.
Okay.
Just something to consider. I think I'll leave it at that. But the recommendations I thought were really sound. They're good.
Other comments, questions for Dr. Knight? Okay. Sorry. Excuse me. So there's no need for a second since this recommendation is here in the packet is a recommendation from the subcommittee. And we do need a vote to approve what has been submitted from the subcommittee. So is there a motion to approve?
Is this with the recommendations, or what are we going to do
These are
here?
these recommendations that are.
And I'm talking about the
here.
recommendation that came from here today, not what's in here, but there were some recommendations and some suggestions that we might need to take a look at. We're going to approve this without those recommendations or suggestions, or how are we going to handle that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is a motion on the table, so why don't we,
Who put the motion on there?
actually, no, there's not.
Oh, the subcommittee. Oh, I missed that one.
Actually, it is from the subcommittee, so there's a motion. So we need to approve them, we need to vote on the motion, and then if we want to have a motion to amend, we can vote on that, and then include whatever that, those amendments might be.
Well, and for clarity, I wasn't
You
going
help
to
me straighten me
offer.
out.
I wasn't going to
Oh.
offer an amendment. I just want to be clear to the EOC, since we are making these recommendations, that until otherwise convinced, I probably would oppose anything before me as far as adding testing. But I do like the idea of integration. But I don't think I need to amend. I just wanted to be upfront with the EOC before, if it ever did come before me.
Yeah.
And Ms. Pender, you expressed similar reservations at the subcommittee meeting with that exact thing, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I think there's no secret of how I feel about extra testing. And right before the meet, and I didn't even want to vote on it last time, but I did, okay? Because my understanding was we're voting with the recommendations, but not on how we're going to add this testing at this point, correct? We're looking at, we all have a clear understanding that civics and social studies is important. But right before the meeting, I actually asked Dana, can we not move forward with social studies and ELA integration instead of adding another test? Can we look at testing it, but in being creative? But I do agree that it should be more than rote. So I agree with lots of things, but I think we need to be creative with testing. So today's vote, my understanding was we're not looking at, we're 100% adding it at fifth and seventh grade. We're looking at just that we're moving forward with putting an emphasis on social studies standards.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah, and not to get ahead of things, but the next piece, this was also, as Ms. Barton said, a big topic at the Accountability Advisory Committee and their work, and same concerns about testing. And one of the recommendations is to do a statewide audit of all of the testing that we're doing, to look at the uses of those assessments, the time frames, the cost, all of that, to look at if there's duplication all of those things before, be thoughtful about putting on that additional testing before we just put that in. So that is a recommendation that's coming in the next one.
And I will say too, the reason that it was so important, I felt like, to be here today was because these recommendations are essentially you all passing the football to the department that will then pass to the state board, that will then pass it back to you. And so I wanted to be here today. I've noted all of the comments that were made, and we will certainly incorporate those into our consideration in the work that we do at the department.
I think that's important too, what Superintendent Weaver said. It will come back to us after the department does their work. Again.
So we're just I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So we're just passing this so that the Department of Education
Correct.
can do their due diligence with what
Yes.
we are suggesting and are recommending.
Correct.
At this time.
Right.
Okay.
We are voting to accept the recommendations of the subcommittee so that we can then pass these to the department so they can do their work. Are you good with that, Mr. Alexander? Are you good with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question though, but based on what Representative Alexander requested, if there is something that we would like to have added to the recommendations just for the State Department's consideration, like psychology and sociology, would that be something just to put down as to add to that, or?
So they would not go forward. You would have to amend the motion to do that if you wanted it to go forward from the EOC. Now, if you would like to make an individual recommendation, we did have some outside groups send in recommendations to us that we then forwarded on to the State Department of Ed, their staff to share with the writing committee. Yeah.
Okay. And one more thing. The recommendations that come from the EOC to the State Department, do they use those as the guidelines, or is... Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's try this one more time. Okay, here we go. All right, so we don't need a second, but we need to, there's a motion on the table to accept the recommendations and the work from the subcommittee. And is there, are all in favor? We just need an up-down vote. So all in favor? Okay, all right. Now, Michelle, we're going back to Dr. Tate. All right, Dr. Tate.
Ms. Yao will be coming to present the recommendations from the cyclical review of the accountability system. She's being joined on Zoom by Laura Pinsino, who is the associate at the Center for Assessment. Ms. Yao.
Thank you, Dr. Tate, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I feel a little bit like it's the celebration at the end of a lot of hard work after this process. So I am privileged to be able to bring the results of the cyclical review of the accountability system, the 2025 work that happened. And I'm going to try to give, I know that you all received this late on Friday, and it was posted on Friday, so hopefully you've had a chance to look over some of the recommendations. It did not go to subcommittee, so it's just coming to the full committee because this group really worked until the tail end. They had a meeting Wednesday of last week, and then Laura Pinsino, who is on Zoom with us today, she's here to fill in any gaps from the Center for Assessment that I may run into and also answer any questions that you all have about the process. Just a reminder of our legislative mandate. You've seen this slide quite a few times. This is the law that the General Assembly passed to do a cyclical review of the accountability system, to really look at continuous improvement of the system. We've heard a lot about it today. You heard Trip Aldridge talk about what they're doing in their school and some of the measures. I've never heard HISI before. That was the first time I'd heard that. Had you heard that one before? That was pretty good. Yeah, I know that HISI acronym. A lot of these measures for college and career readiness really matter, and they communicate. He was talking about a parent that was concerned because their child did not have a career ready measure. So it's really meaningful not only for school leaders but for parents and students. So the work that this group did is very meaningful. So this is the law that governs what we do. This is the Accountability Advisory Committee membership that came. This group met 5 times over the course of the year. You see here that we had representation in the education spectrum all the way from first steps to higher ed. We had folks from the Commission on Higher Ed as well as the technical college represented. We had 3 superintendents. We had a principal, number of folks from district offices. We also had Superintendent Weaver. I believe you attended every single meeting, Superintendent. Melanie Barton served as the governor's representative, and we had a parent on the group as well, and business was represented. So a very diverse group that came to the table to talk about the accountability system as well as the artifact of that system, which is the school report card. So I would be negligent if I didn't recognize these folks from the Center for Assessment. They worked with us in 2020, and we asked them to work with us again in 2025. Both Chris Domoleski and Laura Pensino came to every in-person meeting that we had. Andre Rupp is an associate that worked on the survey, the statewide survey that we did. But we are fortunate to have these folks on our side because they do this work nationally. They are very familiar with South Carolina's system. Chris Domoleski actually serves on the South Carolina TAC, and then they bring a lot of expertise in working with other states on accountability and assessment. And they staff the Council of Chief School State Officers, their assessment and accountability roundtable. So just an amazing group of folks to work with, and they facilitated the Accountability Advisory Committee work. So this is the ambitious timeline that the group worked with. The last meeting, as I mentioned, was this past Wednesday, so we were on a very tight turnaround. But I want to focus on some of that blue arrow there. This is, the group met from August all the way until December, and these are what they focused on in each of the meetings. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the public opinion research that we did leading up to this. In 2020, we did this process for the first time, and that was a criticism that we received, was that we didn't involve a lot of parents and business folks from the outside. It was 2020, so that was a difficult process to do. So we tried to really overcorrect this time and get a ton of feedback from folks. So I want to just summarize a little bit about what we've done, and y'all have seen some of this before, so I'll just touch on it a little bit to remind you. We did some listening sessions back in the spring. We did 3 virtual sessions and had 40 attendees that represented 26 cities, parents, educators, and community members, and these were really our 5 takeaways from that. Nothing particularly surprising, but one of the things, stakeholders were generally well aware of the report cards. That made me feel good, because when I started at the EOC 20 plus years ago, that was my job, was to talk about the report cards and how they could be used as tools for improvement in communities. And that was not something that usually was a new thing for stakeholders. So that I was excited to see that. The South Carolina schools are generally perceived to be underperforming. That is something that we see in other states. We see that that's not surprising or rare. We were seeing that 20 years ago too. Typically, folks feel like their school is doing great. It's those other schools that have opportunities for improvement. So it's just interesting. It still rises to the top. One of the big things is stakeholders desire comprehensive, relevant, and equitable data. This came up over and over again. Everybody wants a lot of information, but they want it quickly. They want to be able to understand it. So that is really the challenge that we have, is communicating the system to a diverse group of stakeholders. Parents that come to the report card and come to the accountability system have very different needs than educators or school board members or legislators. So you want it to work for everyone, but this is definitely something that rose to the top in terms of all of the feedback that we got. We did see support for maintaining the current descriptive rating system, so we don't have to worry about having to talk about A to F this year. And then college and career readiness remains a top concern for parents. And you'll see that bear out in some of the work that happened with the Accountability Advisory Committee. Graduation rate is no longer the goalpost. It's college and career readiness. We want to make sure that students are prepared when they walk across that stage with something other than just a diploma. We also, with the help of the Center for Assessment, did a statewide survey. It was conducted online, and it was distributed May through early of July of 2025. We had roughly 1,600 responses. I will note that many of the respondents were in the education sector, so a lot of folks representing education, which makes sense. 27% identified as school leaders, 20% identified as teachers, 16% as district leaders, and 9% as other school or district staff. So a lot of those experienced users to the report card found the ratings were too low. Very few found that they were too high. And then some noted that some important information was missing. Achievement and safety rose to the top. This was interesting because when we did some focus groups years ago and had parents look at the report cards and do some scavenger hunts on things that they were looking for, that's what we heard. Safety was most important, and it needed to be at the front of the report card. It was not something that they wanted to have to dig for. So that's why it's on the front of the report card now. Users asked for clear explanations and better search functionalities, followed by videos, visuals, and more outreach. I know EOC staff I am not a video watcher, but I think I am in the minority. Most people want to watch quick videos on how to do things, and so that's what we're hearing from people. They want to be able to go through tutorials and see things in a different way. And then important areas of improvement included support for special populations, increased usability, and rebuilding trust in the system. Y'all have also seen this before. We tried to listen and lift up those voices that we've been hearing over the last 5 years. These are topics that we have been hearing about. The high school experience. We hear a lot from educators about those things that need to be on the menu for college and career readiness. So we wanted to make sure to elevate those into these focus convenings. So we had one for CCR, and those folks that served on these focus convenings were also nominated by EOC members, state board members. We involved the School Improvement Council for parents. We had a lot of parent involvement in these, which was very interesting. And we also had school board members and others. We had one for awarding performance as well as multilingual learners, and then the public expectations of ratings versus the actual ratings. Interesting that what ends up happening when you talk to folks about what their expectation is for a school that receives a rating of excellent is that 80 to 85% of students should be on grade level. And oftentimes that's not what we're seeing currently in the system. So the key priorities, and going back to some of what you'll see, I'm just going to hit the highlights of what the group did. They looked at design principles of the system that should be prioritized. So these were early discussions. All of the public opinion research, the focus convenings research, that was given to the Accountability Advisory Committee for them to know about and to consider in their deliberations and their discussions. These key priorities were also established early on so that once they got into the nitty-gritty, the indicators, all the specifics of the system, they could have these as their guideposts, so to speak. So the first one is that reports should be accessible to all users. Things should be easy to find and easy to understand. So very simple, which is not often an easy task with something as complex as an accountability system. But that doesn't mean, as I'm reminded by a voice that in the Accountability Advisory Committee, just because it's hard does not mean we should not do it or try it. So second, users want to know what to do with information in the reports. This was an interesting piece that came up, particularly from the business community and parents, where why would I want to go to a report card that my child goes to if it has a bad rating? Unless it gives me an actionable, something that I can do to take action. So that was something that we definitely heard, was that stakeholders other than educators wanted to be able to use the report card as a tool for continuous improvement. Reports should be designed to support priority uses. We heard over and over again that information should be comparable within and across years. You should be able to go to the report card and see multiple years and see historical data, and that's something I know the department has heard, and we're all looking at this and taking it to heart. I know Dr. Knight has said over and over again she wants that on there. She goes to these report cards a great deal, and she has said, I don't want to have to go back and forth from years to look at different report cards. I want to be able to see a snapshot. We talked about similar schools. Some of you, I think it's been about 15, 20 years ago, we used to have a similar schools options on the report card. So schools could look at schools like ours is what it looked like. It was removed because parents said they didn't understand it. So again, some stakeholders found that that was valuable, others did not. Now, how you define similar schools, though, can be a discussion point, and that is not one that this group really decided upon, but we looked at poverty in the early days, but you could define similar schools in a different way. Also, the report cards not only should look at areas of need, they should highlight and celebrate successes for specific outcomes and combined overall outcomes. So this was going back to the law. We've got rewards and interventions. So it's not just about interventions, it's about rewarding schools for the successes that they have. This is the key priorities for the accountability system. So the system design and the priorities identified framed the more granular discussions about specifics to the system. This was really exercises that the Accountability Advisory Committee did to sort of look at that balance between simplicity and comprehensiveness. There's definitely, it's tough to really come to that fine point in the middle because you have a very comprehensive system that you are trying to make simple for all the different stakeholders. But ultimately, the group felt like transparency was a top priority. The majority of members felt that there should be one accountability system that meets federal and state requirements. Thank goodness. The General Assembly has asked us to do that. Those of us who've lived through two systems and trying to communicate that out to stakeholders I was very pleased that that was a recommendation. Again, the meaningful comparisons piece was a big one from year to year. Also, the committee members preferred that the state pursue changes to the system with measured caution, and you'll see this in some of the specific recommendations. Through-year assessment is one. The group talked a great deal about that, and we were encouraged to proceed with caution. Look at what other states are doing, because oftentimes when you go into a system where you try to reduce testing, you end up testing more. So it's, I think I'm accurate in saying that the group felt like that components of a solution needed to be studied thoroughly before we just went in and did something. The group felt that mid to long-term implementation timelines for system change was preferable to moving quickly, and that they did not want to overly burden schools and districts. And that if we were to change the system, that we, again, would be looking at the entire school context. And then again, the accessibility of the report cards in the system to a wide audience, and oftentimes that takes translation. And you'll see that in some of the specific recommendations that come from the group. They are grouped into these 4 buckets. So we looked at report card indicators first, so that the actual design of the system. And Ms. Pender asked me at the beginning, because she had looked through this, I'm going to note when there are things that the group, I believe, wants to move on right away. And those of you who participated in the discussions, please do join me, because there are a lot of recommendations that I think are very broad, but they're not prioritized. So I think what I heard in priorities, I want to make sure you all heard as well. So please chime in. So just a reminder, these are the current indicator weights in the system. You all are aware that the 100-point system is in statute. So that's something that we have to do. And this is currently the structure. So some of the recommendations that came that were specific to the indicators. The group wanted us to explore alternatives for incentivizing test participation. Right now, the federal 95% participation in tests it's a federal requirement. The group felt that because what we do now, the students who are not tested that's a penalty in the system. They go in as a 0. There are other states that do that differently. So while there's not a specific recommendation to do this, they would like for us to look at how other states handle this, because the group felt that this was overly punitive, the way we handled it as a state. Number 2, they wanted us to study the impact of student progress with respect to prior performance. This was specific to students who it's harder to grow students who are coming in at a higher level than others. So that was something that they wanted us to consider. Again, not agreement as a group, but just keep that in mind, because right now it is difficult for schools to achieve high levels of growth. They can do it because every student can grow, but they express difficulty in that area for students who come in with high achievement. So they wanted us to promote accurate understanding and use of the student progress scores. That is complex to communicate. Dr. Lavery does an excellent job of this, but it's not easily translatable to the public, to parents and others. But again, that's not something, just because it's hard doesn't mean we should not do it. And then the group wanted us to look at the multilingual learner progress indicator. Currently, that takes up a significant amount. It's 10 points in the system if you have 20 or more students who are multilingual learners. And the group wanted us to look at ways to potentially report that in a different way. So where it would either be less points in the system, or those students, it would be reflective of the student population that you had of multilingual learners. So again, not a specific recommendation, but something that we need to be considering. The employability credential was brought up quite a bit. Those students, that's in the high school student success measure. That is an alternative to a high school diploma. There was discussion about whether or not that should be considered as an alternative diploma. The group did not want to do that, but they wanted the influence of the employability credential to be considered in discussions about the system moving forward. The group felt that we should recognize the seal of biliteracy in the college and career readiness indicator. And this is also an area where there was discussion about the distinctions made between college and career readiness, particularly the business members of the group said career readiness is the ultimate goal. Some students go through college to get to career, but the ultimate goal is career readiness. So although there was not consensus about doing this, there was discussion about merging those two together and not putting college and career readiness together when reporting. That was also part of that because they're just different. They're very different. One thing that we did talk a great deal about is the research to validate and improve those readiness indicators. And that's ongoing work with the Coordinating Council for Workforce Development, where each of those options are being looked at to see if students are going in to high-wage jobs with those career readiness indicators, and also for we have the data now to look at those post-secondary outcomes and see if those students that that we say are college and career ready are indeed college and career ready. So the group did suggest that before we make large-scale changes to this piece, we should really consider the data that we get back from that process. And then we need to study alternatives for a more comprehensive and balanced assessment system. We talked about this earlier. Through-year assessment was talked about a great deal, as well as social studies and science testing. But the group felt strongly that before we just put back social studies testing, we should look at the entire plethora of assessment that we do, all the way from 4K into 12th grade, and see what the uses of it are, who's using it, are teachers using it, or is this just an assessment that students are given? So I think we might find some duplication. We might find some things that are not useful or not being used in the system productively, but that was something that the group felt like we needed to do. All right, recommendations related to aggregation and identification. The blue box there was brought up after some discussions that we had with some of the staff at the Department of Ed on accountability designations. So you've got federal accountability designations, so schools could be CSI, TSI, ATSI. We also have state accountability designations, priority underperforming and chronically underperforming. We have school report card ratings, and then we also have some state commendations. So because of, it can be difficult to get an accurate picture of how schools are doing when you have some schools that receive federal designations but not a state designation, or perhaps you've got a school that is ATSI, a federal designation, but also has a school report card of excellent. So it's difficult for educators to understand it, and also difficult for the public. So the group talked a lot about this on the last day to explore alternatives to a streamlined system, a systemic approach that would be more coherent to sort of join those together, a cohesive system of designations. Also, when it came to how schools should be identified and the weightings of accountability indicators, a process was suggested to actually do a standard setting. So similar to what we do for assessments, where teachers go in and do bookmarking and say, this is a test item that is meeting this standard in 6th grade, it would be a very similar process for report cards and the designations. That work was done in Kentucky and Mississippi recently, and they felt like the designations for school report cards were better reflective of the public expectations of schools. So I think that rose to the top as being something that we would do pretty quickly, as well as the assessment audit. Those were definitely recommendations that I heard as being do these right away. Reporting and communication. The group wanted us to continue to invest in dashboards and data visualizations with the goal of having a wide variety of audiences. And I think we can't do this in a vacuum. It's important for us to acknowledge that parents are using these tools and actually sit with them when they're using the tools. That is very eye-opening. Having done this before, we use things that were traditionally easy. I use a tool very differently. That tool I use very often, but when you see parents that don't use it, it's important to see that, because those are the folks that you want to be able to access these tools. And then the group felt that we should produce ancillary report materials and professional development so users can understand the information. We have the Expect More site and others where we've tried to boil it down. Like, why are these indicators important? Why do I need to know about this? But again, there's different modalities that we can use to communicate that information, and we heard that loud and clear. Communication came up in every single meeting as being a huge topic that we needed to really hone in on. And finally, resources and supports. The group felt like we needed to continue to route those school improvement activities through the district offices, particularly those folks that were part of the education community, and connect those school improvement efforts with the school designations. I was reminded a lot of the Beating the Odds work because we were asked by you all to go in and see for those high achieving schools, what are those schools doing? The same for those schools that receive federal designations and state designations. What are those? What are there commonalities in those schools that are causing those schools to be in these support designations? And then, even more importantly, those that are exiting designations. What are they doing differently? Are there any commonalities that we're seeing? So it's sort of a flipped script, so to speak, of the Beating the Odds support group. And then ultimately, I think just being in a room 5 times last year, full day, with folks from different walks of life, from First Steps, higher ed, K-12, parents, community members, really you learn a lot from people who don't run in the same circles as you. And it was made clear over and over that we should be talking to one another. There shouldn't be a silo approach, and we should have partnerships with parents and community groups. And because we're all in this together, we're all part of this team trying to support students in school improvement. And we all have our different perches, but ultimately we need to be working together. And then the experts in the room, the Center for Assessment, gave us some guides for next steps in the work. And we've talked about this already. When we're making novel or sweeping changes, such as through your assessment, they would ask for us to go and look at lessons learned from other states, promising practices, because this is very complex. And before defining operational specifications about some of those indicators and the overall system design, collaborate with specialists in the subject matter experts. So if you're doing something that is related to career readiness, make sure that you involve folks that are in the business community. So it's just reminders about making sure that we have the right people at the table. And then pilot and refine. And we all have done that recently with proof of concept. That's been a favorite phrase of ours, to do something that makes sense on a small scale to see if it works. Because South Carolina is very different, very diverse, and it's not necessarily the same approach for every single school community. So pilot and refine, we heard that over and over again. So that is really the report and the recommendations. And I'm happy to, this does not actually come, it is an action item. And I'll also mention that what happens with this report. This goes to the General Assembly. Yeah, per the law. So these recommendations are to go to members of the General Assembly.
Okay, Ms. Barton.
Since I'm the only one that's been through this ad nauseum many years.
Thank you. So you feel my celebration.
It's going to be on my tombstone. I want to summarize 3 things that I thought were the big aha moments. For everybody around that table, college and career readiness or college or career readiness meant more than the graduation rate. There is a perception right now that the graduation rate means nothing. You've sat in a class and earned credits, and that's it. But what we're trying to do is set up a workforce and make sure all South Carolinians can have a good quality job. Everybody, superintendents, educators, all said the bottom line is, do students walk across that auditorium and ready for the next step? So that needs to go
Thank
up,
you, Melanie.
even
Yes.
if we can get the feds to pull back on the grad rate so that we can put more emphasis on the college. That was a big one. The second big aha moment, I think, especially for me, was the idea of setting what an excellent school is, a good average, by having people in the room do it just like you do a test, just like you do an assessment. So it's 50% proficient. And we mentioned Superintendent Weaver's goal of 75% being on
Yes.
in proficient in math and English. Maybe we use the 75% to say that's what it, if that's the state goal, and we've all agreed that that's the state goal, we look at it. But the most important part of that for me was the feeling that legislators need to be there to go through that process. Key legislators who have to go back and across the halls and explain it, they need a stake in this and they need to understand it. And the final thing was a good discussion on who is ultimately accountable. Because there was a lot of discussion about school boards and superintendents, that really those are the key leaders that we need to make sure understand this system and that they're held accountable. Because it's one thing to hold a school accountable, but in an organization, a business, look at Mr. Law, it's the CEO and it's the board that drive it. So we need to make sure that the school boards and superintendents understand this system and have accountability, whether it's, they're signing, they're compensate, whatever it is, they need a stake in this as well. So that's my 3 points. It was a good experience. It was very data driven. So you had to be a geek to like it. But those 3 came across as different things that I hadn't heard from people before about what accountability. Focus on simple things. Focus on what's important. And then let the rest go.
Read, write, do a little math, being able to think.
Thank you, Mel.
So I'm going to tag on here for 1 second because those are my 2 points too. So if y'all just allow me a second. Recommendation 7, explore approaches to increase the influence of the employability credential. I like the recommendation. I'm not sure I followed it in the context completely of how it was presented, not because you didn't speak well, but I guess my concern is, why don't we make having a high school diploma be more valuable than try to create something else, whether you're going to work or you're going to college, like it be more substantive, which I think is where Ms. Barton is going, if we can get some relief from our friends in Washington. But I think that's right. And I also think, I know this committee has spent a lot of time looking at over the years, what were the certs that, we recommend and how those correlate to the jobs and the careers that will be here in the future for our citizens. And we successfully got 1 or 2 things off of there that were silly. But I guess, so I'm real curious about that. I think having something that is, and I can tell you this from my own work experience, some things that were created for us and for some other manufacturers in the state, we now believe that we found if you will, an off-the-shelf credential that actually is more substantive and more valuable to us in terms of what we really need than something that was supposed to be kind of a gap fill, if you will, for folks who didn't have 1 or 2 years of prior manufacturing experience. And so we were trying to do that and to integrate it into high schools. My second thing was about, and I think Ms. Barton, we did not coordinate on this beforehand, but your comment about the comparative analysis. So you'll save yourself and your staff a whole lot of time, because every year I always ask for it. Can I please have it all in one giant Excel sheet, Mr. Collins, so I can look at it and, sort by, poverty ratings or male, female, or English as a second learner. I think that's important. And I would assume it's important to policymakers, and which also gets to me, Ms. Barton, the accountability, because, and and maybe, it can be on all the tabs, obviously for the tab that's for parents and the tab that's for policymakers and the tab that's for educators, but somehow or another to raise that awareness, maybe make it a question. Would you like to see how others in schools like yours are did? Because I think as a parent, you want to know, how's my child doing?
Yes.
And how does that compare to other children in their school and their school district and the state, because we all think our children are brilliant. But I also think it helps to create that accountability, and it shows some of what we've done with the Beating the Odds, which is poverty is not an excuse for not learning. And maybe we learn a little different. Maybe we have to adjust, but it shouldn't be just a carte blanche excuse for, not being able to be successful, because we've proven those children can be. So just my comments.
So,
Superintendent Weaver. Yeah, okay, sorry.
well, I was going to address the employability credential because I did not do a good job of explaining that. So that is a credential that is for students who their IEP team has determined that they are not on a graduation track. So they are not, they're not going to receive a regular high school diploma.
Okay.
And it's less than 1% of the student population, and it's very heavy on work-based learning. It's about 600 hours, a very valuable credential, but it is not a diploma. And I think one of the things that has come up as a concern, and we heard about our the high school student success, the HISI indicator, those students are not included in that. They are not counted in that indicator because they are not on track to graduate. So we hear from educators that they don't think that's fair. They would like for those students to be included. We've pushed back. Those students are getting a very important, valuable certificate. Very important. But they are not on track to graduate. So that's part of the feedback that I think was being discussed in that particular discussion.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure I cleared that up.
No, that's much more clear to me now. Thank you. I was thinking we were doing something else there.
Okay.
I apologize if I misheard.
No.
Superintendent Weaver.
And I won't belabor it, but just echo exactly what Melanie said. Thank you, Dana. Thank you to the Center for Assessment. Just their facilitating was masterful. And to your point that I wanted to pick up on, we're not waiting to action a lot of these recommendations. So in late November, we actually had a focus group that got together, members of the EOC, Melanie was there, members of the department, and we've put together what we call our Accountability and State Report Card X team, which wanted to read you the mission of it just because it touches on so many of the pieces that we've talked about today. It's to redesign and sustain South Carolina's accountability system and school report card so that it clearly defines excellence, measures what matters, and provides families, educators, and policymakers with actionable, easy to understand information that drives improvement for students. And ultimately, I think to your point, Melanie, the point of accountability is to incentivize or change adult behavior. Because we know that adult leadership is what ultimately is delivering outcomes in our classrooms every single day for students. And if that data is not timely or actionable or meaningful, it doesn't matter, to your point, Representative Collins. And so that's really our goal, is to get down to a granular level of what can a parent do to help their school? What can a school improvement council do to take this report card and make it actionable? We're also working with local school boards. We've actually started inviting members of local school boards from across the state to come into the department. And one of our visions with that work going forward is to actually have a report card 101. This is how you can go back and look at your school and district report cards to understand how you can hold your superintendent accountable for those outcomes. And so I think that kind of information level setting is going to be really important going forward. But I think a lot of the communication pieces that we talked about, we had the members of the department who were there for all of these convenings. And so through this X team that we've convened, we're actually going to be actioning a lot of this, hopefully in time even for next year's report card.
Just one comment to that. I would also encourage you to include employers in that process. Because, just we hear these students who go into the military, they have to reprogram them, retrain them. Kids who go into college, we're sending them to remedial math or remedial English. I might have been one of those remedial math students, but but you know, there's also a lot of reprogramming, if you will, that employers are having to do, and you know, I think that's an important voice to hear too. Yes, sir.
I might be a little. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dana, for your presentation. I might be a little off, but I'm hearing that report cards are used differently by different entities. And it seems to me that instead of us looking at the results, like we're trying to put together a package that pleases everybody at certain times. So I guess my question is, who are the report cards for? You know, we want to do this for the teachers, we want to do that for the superintendent, we want to do this for the parents. So what's the report card for? I'm just trying to grab that holistically. Hold on. I'm trying to grab that holistically,
Yes, sir.
so that I can have some clarity of the report card, what the parents want, what the teachers want, what the superintendents want, what the business leaders want, what the politicians want. What are they for?
So, Mr. Alexander, that's the $1 million question, is to they are for the general public to understand the performance of schools and the performance of students. That is their purpose. But it's one tool, and you want it to be ultimately you want the public to be able to use it to make decisions to help students for continuous improvement. That is the purpose of it. It is the artifact of the accountability system. But the challenge comes in curating the experience for each of those folks that come in. And we've talked a little bit about, you can do that sometimes with technology and filters and things like that. Like, I've got a question about something, I want to go in and look for you can filter your question based on all sorts of different things. So through the magic of technology, we're hoping that we can do some of that to make that curated experience meaningful for all those different stakeholders you talked about.
I just think, data science, data visualization, like there are so many tools now. We've actually had a trip to Arizona, I think, looking at what Arizona State is doing with incredible data visualization. And so how can we as a state be part of creating those visual dashboards for each of those different audiences that you identified, so that each user can have a customized experience and get the data that they want? But I think ultimately, to me, the purpose of accountability is responsibility. It's how we ensure that there is trust in our public education system, that we are delivering the preparation that students need to ultimately be successful in life.
I guess I'm just trying to grab, because I want what's best for the students. No reflections on the business community, because that's the end of the day. That's your product you draw from. I want what's best and simplified for the students. And I think sometimes we overlook that to satisfy us. And the student, when I say us, the adults, and the students are somehow being left out of the process. That's just my feeling. We're trying to satisfy this group, we're trying to satisfy that group. And then when you look at the bottom line and you look at our students, and you look at the money that we are paying, and you look at our results, which are improving, when you look at our results, who's winning? Mm-hmm. That should be our goal, in my mind's eye. Mm-hmm. Creating an environment where every kid have the opportunity. And if we are not providing the opportunity for these kids, then all of this stuff, in my mind's eye, somehow moved. We must make sure that through all these testings, through all these assessments, through all of these different things, that our kids, our students, are the benefactors of a report card. This is what you're doing, kid. That's important to me. How we manage that, how we put all that together, That's the big deal. But it seems to me that all of this stuff for the legislators, for the business community, not for the students. How do we reconcile that moving forward? And because our students now, as you know, that they are learning differently, and maybe we're using some of the same tactics we used way back and expect different results, but students learn differently now. Our learning system has changed. I mean, some kids home now taking classes at Tech in their house. So how do we reconcile that? And how do we make this transition with our educational system? And it's continual. We'll never get to the end of the goal because it's continual. It's continual. But how do we make that transition moving forward to make sure that our students are prepared to go to work prepared to go to work for the companies, and at the same time keep us happy, whatever that means.
And I think that's the ultimate goal for policymakers, for educators, for selfishly for us as South Carolinians. Like as a parent, I'd like my children to come back here and live and work one day, and we want there to be good opportunities for them. So, Michelle, you want to address that, and then I think Representative Collins had a comment.
I was going to see. I don't want to put Laura Pensino on the spot, but she's she and I have talked a lot about, and she's worked in other states before with sort of what you've talked about, Mr. Alexander, that, what is the goal? And this is trying to figure out how to communicate what we're trying to do. And I think ultimately it's how do you incentivize action, not just for educators, but for the public, for parents and others. Laura's got some experience in other states where they've decoupled certain parts of the system, the state and federal system, to make that a little bit easier. Laura, I didn't know if you could address that for the group. That might help a little bit. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, how, and I understand, but how would a report card benefit some of our poor school districts that do not have the resources? And we know that they don't have the resources to perform at certain levels. I mean, how does that help them? I understand, but how does that help them? You all want me to perform at a certain level, but you're not giving me the resources to perform. You want my grades to be here, but I don't have the support in this community, the educators, the teachers, the preachers, and us. I don't have the support. So how does you showing me that my school is not as good? Of course not, because I don't have the resources.
So I'll tell you my example. I'll tell you my example. So I've been asked by school board members when the report cards come out, getting at exactly what your question is. They want to be able to look at the big giant deck of data, and they want to be able to look at other schools that are like that are like their lower performing schools or like their whole district, and they're choosing to reach out to those school districts and those school leaders as a school board member to find out, what are you doing? How are you doing this? If our demographics are the same as yours and your kids are performing 20 points better than I am, they're making B's are better, and so I think that's what is, because we can learn from each other.
And I'm not opposing the report cards. I'm just hoping that we look at them differently moving forward. I'm not opposing report cards because you have to have some type of standard, something to gauge.
Right.
But I want us to consider looking at them from a different perspective and making sure that whatever we are doing with these report cards is that we're doing it for those kids. Right. And I understand we need that, but I think we need to look at it. Maybe go to other states and see how they are using it, if they are using it. I wonder how many other states have report cards.
Well,
are there plenty of states that have report cards?
Oh, yes, sir.
All of them? They have to have them?
Mm-hmm. And one thing, Trip Aldridge, when he was up here today, talked about the use of report cards and just the healthy competition that goes on among the adults in his district, which that's behavior that, honestly, if that's what we need to incent, then I'm okay with that.
I'm just saying, we just have to look at it. That's all I'm saying. I don't oppose it, but just giving us some questions.
Ultimately, it gets what you need for kids, and that's the goal.
That's the goal. Superintendent Weaver?
I was just going to say, that's why I love the Beating the Odds work so much, is because you're looking at schools that are Title I schools that historically have been considered under-resourced or underperforming, who are absolutely knocking it out of the park. And in so many of those schools, what we're seeing is leaders, adults, who are doing exactly what we heard from the principal at Fort Dorchester today. They are making strategic use of data to reinforce and support the adult behavior within that school to provide the supports and resources that those students need. So I, again, just commend this committee for the great work that you guys are doing on that Beating the Odds study.
Okay, Ms. Pender, I'm coming back to you, but Representative Collins was first. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to try to say this without offending anybody or upsetting anybody. And I'm concerned about Ms. Barton's epitaph. And I know my ire is with the federal government on this. But I also love anecdotes proving points. If our objective is for the general public, we are failing miserably. On Thursday, I spoke to the Easley Chamber, to 40 or 50 businesses. I asked them to raise their hand if they knew the school that they're zoned for, what their report card is, the grade was, and 0 raised their hands. 0. Outside of this room and outside of every teacher in this state, nobody cares about these report cards. Nobody. And so the question becomes, then what is, and that's why it was a beautiful question, Representative Alexander, is what is the point? And I think Superintendent Weaver is correct, is that we're directing adults, teachers, to do things. That's what ultimately the goal is and how we're using it. And I think there's some good in that. I do. I think we do need to direct some adults in where things are important. But, you know, you look at these accountability indicators and just specifically high school, to your point, academic achievement, Representative Alexander is skewed on where you are. Grad rate, we all know, is pointless now. Multilingual learners progress, I mean, that's good for multilingual learners, but for the other 95%, that's a pointless statistic. Going to elementary, the school climate, we kind of make a joke about it as well. So, I mean, the question for me is, what are we doing in it? And I know, again, I need to go testify in D.C., but here's how simple it is to me. I want to know Easley High School graduates, 2020, that graduated in 2020, are they right now, are they in military? Are they in a job that is higher than $35,000, our median income in Easley? Or are they in college and graduating? That's all I want to know. That's it. Or, and I'll add, are they a good person on Facebook? Like, that's it. We complicate this stuff, and I know we do it for feds, but no, nobody cares about this stuff. And I think the quicker we, unless we truly want to, be honest about it, and let's say, all right, what we want to accomplish is we want to increase our ELA scores. We're going to 100% of your grade is ELA. Well, then let's do that. That's better than saying school climate and all this other stuff. Let's say what matters right now. To me, absentee matters. Let's say if you have a certain percentage, then you get an F. If you don't, you get an A. And I'm sure that they will direct those adult behaviors to what we want. And I don't know within the federal system, last thing I'll say, Representative Alexander and I were at School Boards Association this weekend, and Saturday night I allegedly had dinner with a federal guy that basically wrote ESSA, and he received all the states. He had to review all of the state applications to that, and he said he was completely mortified because it was completely opposite of what he was intending through ESSA. And I think that's the kind of the deal is, you know, and we deal with it all the time as legislators, is we have some grand idea, but when it's implemented, it's horrendous. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what has happened with this whole accountability system, and ultimately why nobody but us cares about it. And I'm sorry about the epitaphs that's going to be on this, but I just want to put that in perspective.
So thank you for bringing that up at the Easley Chamber, but I'm also curious, and this is really embarrassing, and I'm going to admit this. Another group that I'm part of, supposedly all people who do what I do for a living, and they get asked, do you know who the President of the United States is? Do you know who the Vice President is? And they go on down the line, and it's real interesting to see how few people who, in theory, are involved in government and politics and how it impacts their employer don't know the answers to those questions. And I'm guessing your folks, no offense to anybody at the Easley Chamber, but I bet they don't know who's on the school board either. Probably not, right? Yep, no.
Can I make
It's a good challenge.
one comment about that, and not to challenge you on this, but I do feel like I need to give voice to a couple people on this committee. We had one parent who took 3 days off from work because she felt so strongly about the report cards, and she felt like her school's report card was way too high. And she pushed back on the superintendent, who said that he didn't think that school climate was in any way important because it was subjective. And she said, I don't care what you think. It's important to me. So also we had a community member who had moved to New York from Aiken, and he drove twice to the meeting because he felt strongly about what was happening specific to Aiken, but he did drive twice to the meeting because he felt strongly about this is an artifact. So I just want to make sure I put that out there, because it was important to them, those folks.
But I do think Mr. Collins and Mr. Alexander's comments are or underline.
Oh, yeah.
We can
Oh,
always
yeah.
do better at
We hear that
communication. We can
too. Just
also
to-
do better
yeah.
at motivating. So how do we? I would like personally, like I would like for people to look more at the data that's included in the report card than from U.S. News and World Report, because when you look down there, how do we drive more people to use that tool? And how do we
Absolutely.
make it more meaningful? And obviously, you've said that 5 or 6 times that's always the goal, is to get it to be.
Well, and as the parent
go-to
reminded us, if you don't tell me, I'm going to find it somewhere else.
Again,
Yeah.
I am not minimizing. I'm just trying to help us look at it differently and how we can maximize, excuse me, what are we doing. I'm not minimizing anything, all right? I'm not minimizing the work that no one is doing, but if it's really not making a difference to the masses, it's not making a difference. It might work for me, but 20 other thousand parents, and I want what's good for them as well.
So you have some names of some folks.
So I'm not minimizing. I'm not minimizing it, madam.
You have some names from your constituency who are you're gonna give over to Michelle and have them come be participants in the next round of, because we need to hear from them, because they're obviously reaching out to you. So give them an opportunity maybe to.
Well, no, nobody's reaching out to me. I had a school board member that asked me. He told me that, I think I'd call you, Dana. I said, Dana, send me those results. I sent it to the school board member. And a couple of days later, I said, what did you see? He said, I don't know. What you wanted a school board member?
But that's important. That's important.
He said, I don't know what I'm seeing.
Ms. Pender.
So we had to use it differently. That's all I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
I'm not sure if I have a
You remember your question? Sorry.
I'm not sure if I
Lots
have a
of passion
question, or if
around
I'm
this
just here,
topic.
or if I'm just here for the comments at this point, because I love the frankness of these two. So I'm glad I went after y'all, because everybody knows how I feel about the report card, about the testing. So yeah, so I appreciate y'all. My question is, and I'm not sure if this is for you, Dana, or Superintendent Weaver, since you commented on this, so it might be a question for you. Out of these 19 recommendations, you said that y'all plan to act on them quickly to make decisions, not necessarily whether it's an actionable step or not. How will individuals, and you said some things might go into effect before the next testing cycle next year, possibly. Is that what I heard you?
Speaking about the particular recommendations
Okay.
around changes to indicators or anything like that, I'm
Okay.
simply talking more about how we make the current report card site in its current construct more usable, because it would require legislative action for us to make
Okay.
changes to the actual calculations and all of that
Okay.
stuff.
So something as simplistic as like number 5 on here. So this will be, then I'll punt this back to you, Dana. Number 5, that's, if this becomes actual, should be a very easy fix. The testing window for MLs opens on January 21st. We still have 5 more months of teaching children. For schools that have 150, 200 MLs, and we have those in my district, they're going to start testing earlier in the window than a school that has 30 ML students. So they're going to get roughly 6 more weeks of teaching in before those MLs, are tested. If I only have 30, I'm going to start at the end of February, and I'm going to run it the last 2 weeks so that I can maximize more teaching time, right? So are things like that, I guess my question is, these 19 recommendations, whether actionable or not, and some of them, to me, are subjective, whether they will even be actionable items or not, are kind of summarized in that one slide of 3 next steps. Well, what is that going to look like, I guess? I believe I heard you say the priority was going to be to look into the accountability system as a whole and how we're testing first,
Right.
and then next steps after
The
that.
audit of the assessment system is a priority, as well as the standard setting for
Okay.
the ratings. And then to your question about the testing window, that was specifically brought up because of the multilingual learners and because of the concern that those students based on the percentage of multilingual learners in a school, that they're oftentimes tested early, and they don't get the full breadth of the content before they're asked to be tested. We had folks from the Office of Assessment and Standards at the department say we're part of the WIDA consortium, and we will ask to see if, because that's the WIDA consortium is who implements the test, and the department has the contract with WIDA. So I think the next step in that was for those folks to go to WIDA and see, is there a way we can do this differently? Because there's a concern that these students are not getting enough time with the content before they're being tested. So honestly, I think it was going to be a simple question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my thought was,
Yeah.
of these 19 items, will we at any point over the next year or so here, like number 5, we're moving towards pushing that window. Number 3, we're not going to make actionable. Are we ever going to get an itemized list of that?
You want action items
I'm just curious.
and
will we-
timelines associated with each of these?
I'm just curious of the year's worth of work, if we will see out of the 19 recommendations, what happens with them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
We can definitely build that in to, we've got strategic planning coming up too. So I think that can be built
And I'm not
into
trying to
that
create
process.
work, but I think if
No, I
all
think-
of these individuals spent a year putting together these 19 recommendations, it would be nice to
Right.
see if we did anything with the
We should be held
recommendations.
accountable for these. So yes, ma'am, we can definitely put that reporting structure into this. And this isn't coming from a subcommittee. So if you'd like to put that on as part of the motion for us to do regular reporting on each of these recommendations, we can certainly integrate that in.
Like I said, I don't want to create any more work for anybody. They spent a year coming up
Yeah,
with 19
absolutely.
recommendations. I'd hate to see that we didn't act on a single one of them. I do think the priority should be looking at what we're doing for testing first, most likely. But I just picked out number 5 because that is very simplistic. I mean, some people are going to start early in that window, and we've only been teaching kids. If a kid comes on the 44th day of school, they're in accountability, and then we don't have much time that
Yeah.
we've tested them. I mean, we've taught them.
I think we
That's
can
just a thought.
incorporate in regular updates, Dr. Lavery. I don't think that's unreasonable. Do you? We absolutely can. Yeah, we can do that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of discussion here. Can you go back and just for the good of all, remind us what happens with this now and what the process is, just so everybody's clear before we get to
Yeah, I'm going to go
our next
to
step.
the law here.
Yep.
So the recommendations now will go forward to the members of the General Assembly. So they will be transmitted to the General Assembly per statute. And then if, to Ms. Pender's point, if you all would like to add to that, we would give regular updates at each committee meeting on the status of each of these, we're happy to do that as a staff.
I'll just be clear. I don't know that it needs to be every meeting.
Okay. Quarterly.
I'm not trying to create more work.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
go
Mr.
ahead, go ahead. I'm sorry, go
Alexander.
ahead,
Yes,
go
sir. No, go ahead.
I want to share my personal concern as to why I'm so engaging in the educational process. Some of you may remember, some of you may not remember, the Education and Economic Development Act. I helped write that. I was on a committee that helped write that about 20 years ago, or longer. Career specialist. I was one of the first in the state. I taught career special. I helped write the curriculum. So, and I used to visit maybe about 200 schools a year in one of my other areas. So when I talk about education, I talk about what I have engaged in about the last 25 years. So I have an invested interest. That what is that? Transform South Carolina. I presented that years ago. Dr. Fred Carter and I presented that years ago. How can we improve public education? How can we get the word out of public education? So my interest and my concern, it doesn't come from anybody else. It comes from my interest in my work in public education. So I wanted to throw that out, basically. Okay. Go ahead.
No, thank you. I think that's good. All right. So, do we have a motion to accept, or is there? So we do need to vote on this. And so, is there a motion to accept the recommendations that were part of the cyclical review and accountability system that we've just gone over? So we need to make a motion, and then we need to vote. Yep. Okay. All in favor? Okay. Are we good? All right. Okay. Hey, and I didn't participate in the meetings for a whole year. I'm exhausted, so imagine how Dana feels. Okay. Oh, are you going to come here and do your update? Oh, I was going to let you guys go. Silly me. Silly me. Okay. Okay, so talking about clarity and accountability, I have 3 sets of instructions up here, so I'm having a little trouble like following which ones I'm supposed to be doing next. Okay, the EIA subcommittee has been meeting a good bit lately. I've seen Mr. Collins a lot in the last couple of months. The subcommittee held public meetings for entities funded by or requesting EIA funds on November the 10th, November the 20th, and December 1st. The subcommittee is bringing to the full EOC a slate of EIA funding recommendations as well as the proviso recommendations. I'm going to ask Dr. Knight, who's been our guide through this process once again this year, to come to the podium and summarize these recommendations.
Thank you. I'll try to be as brief as I can. Did want to point out on the slide that we, from the Revenue Department, there was $98 million new dollars, $98.9 million new dollars recurring, and there was $210 million of surplus. Those are estimates. The committee met, and they said they wanted to recommend the following increases with those funds. Teaching Fellow Scholarship Program, they wanted to increase it by 20 scholarships. So that would be $24,000 for 4 years at approximately $500,000, 480. And then also increase the scholarship amount from $6,000 to $10,000 during their junior and senior years as an incentive for these young, I started to say girls, I'm sorry, for these young girls and boys to continue the teaching fellow. Teaching fellows is found to be a very efficient and effective way to recruit and retain teachers. These are very bright young men and women coming out of high school that you recruit into the teaching profession. I know Ms. Tate, Dr. Tate has been a teaching fellow, and I think your daughter was, and so is into teaching. And I've hired many teaching fellows, I'm sure. You have 2 down in Beaufort. So that was one that everybody agreed on for an increase. Second is state aid to classrooms, which is money primarily for teacher salaries. It was recommended that we increase teacher salaries to $50,000 at a minimum across the state. That would take an additional $150 million. Usually these funds are shared between general fund and EIA. Based on our recommendations, we recommended that $77 million plus be taken from EIA and the remaining from the general fund. But that certainly would be a legislative prerogative. In addition, special schools would also get their teacher salaries at $650,000, and that would be your 3 governor schools, School for the Deaf and Blind, et cetera. So your special schools. Decreases, $5 million to National Board. This does not cut National Board. It simply cuts the $34,500,000 that's in there. The number of National Board teachers are declining over time. However, in the last couple of years, we've seen it increase from about 30-something to 90-something, so that's great. I think teachers are getting re-energized by it. They get a $5,000 supplement from the state. Locally, some districts give more money to increase teacher national awards. These are teachers in the classroom. You cannot leave the classroom and get this money. Additional investments, so these are new. The teacher career ladder, $1.4 million, and that career ladder is to create, and I'm not sure, Superintendent Weaver, you can maybe speak to this better than I can, but to create places in schools that teachers can perform duties that would support the school's function. For example, you could have a teacher that's doing mentoring, and they're a certified mentor. Sarah has ways to certify mentors so that their role is to, with a first-year teacher, possibly a second-year teacher that needs some more support, they are taking their extra time outside of their regular school day, or maybe taking their planning period to mentor a teacher. I could see where you had individual coaches or specialists in certain subject areas that were working in schools doing something. So it's a way for teachers to stay in the classroom, but also perform some duties outside of their classroom and get compensated. I'm going to stop there and see if Superintendent Weaver, you had anything else to add?
No, I just think, there's a lot of schools that are already doing this, and what this would do is actually create a statewide pilot to actually create some consistent definitions around mentor teachers and things like that, and then, again, like you said, compensate those teachers accordingly.
And I think the key, and I really like the idea of the pilot program and getting some feedback from schools as well, but I think having ways for teachers to obtain maybe certain certifications, even like the mentorship certification, which is a relatively small amount of time, but good training that they could go out and support the teachers in their schools. They could support another school. It depends on what the superintendent or how this member wants to do it. But I think it needs to be somewhat uniform so that you just don't make up something in a school unless that's something, Superintendent Weaver, you want to try with the school to see how we can do this for teachers. Again, we want to keep them in the classroom, but do they have services? Do they have expertise that they could share outside the classroom? So that's $1.4 million. Instructional materials, $10 million. Primarily it's Algebra 1. I think there was some computer science, correct me if I'm wrong, but then there was also some maintenance monies and some transportation issues, not so issues, but monies for additional books. Instructional support, $77 million. Those are things, like I said earlier, the LOR, the Learning Object Repository, or their instructional hub. That was paid by just different funds. It now needs to have a home. The LMS, the Learning Management System, which all schools have, all teachers use to either do online, to access the LOR, so that's absolutely needed. Project Read, we had a presentation. We have money to them now. We actually went out and did a little report. We found them to be very effective in what they were doing, so we wanted them to grow. And so we were asking for $250,000 additional funds. The South Carolina Council on Economics, $150,000. They certify personal literacy, personal finance, and so feel like they need some additional money to go out and make sure that the teachers in the high schools who, when they're teaching this, are certified. Then that's recurring, and then non-recurring or surplus, we suggested to continue with Superintendent Weaver's plan on school safety. I think you do safety grants, if I'm correct, and $5 million, and then the remaining monies for surplus to be determined by the General Assembly. So let me stop there and see what questions.
So we're going to do this in sections, if you will. If there are questions here, and then we'll go through the provisos and kind of some language that was crafted from the research and from the presentations and kind of past experiences that we'll go through. And so we'll give you opportunity to ask questions about this, and then, or make comments, and then also after we go through the provisos. Anything at this point? Okay, Dr. Knight, you gonna take those provisos? Or are you gonna do, or Dan, or, okay.
I'll do the
Oh, yeah, and then
provisos, yeah.
I'm sorry, Michelle. I needed for her to go over the provisos.
Okay, so that's on page 11. These were proviso revision requests that were actually adopted by the subcommittee. A proviso revision request for 1.46, which is the full day 4K proviso. EOC is suggesting that a line be added to allow school districts who are participating in the EOC waitlist pilot be exempt from the September 1 requirement that districts have to submit a survey of students that are on their wait list. It's a survey that the Department of Ed puts out. It just provides them a little bit of relief for that because what they are doing is weekly back and forths on students who are on a wait list with First Steps to try to find placements for those students. We did it with Aiken and Lexington 1. I think that's right, Dr. May. Is that right? Okay. Oh, Lexington 5? Oh, Lexington 1. Okay, yeah. Just wanted to make sure that the correct districts. We did that this past year. It was very successful. There were students who were actually placed during their 4K year instead of sitting on a wait list. So we're encouraging other districts to participate in that. And part of this is to incent them to not have to do a survey since they're already doing a lot of the legwork. The next one is for 1A.44, which is the rural teacher recruiting incentive proviso. It just strikes the language that the EOC be required to complete an evaluation of the impact of incentives by June of 26. We will have completed that by the time, so that's just kind of sort of a cleanup amendment. The next two proviso revision requests, 1A.6 and 1A.72, are related to recommendations that came as a result of the teacher loan program annual evaluation. The first one makes some suggested edits to the teacher loan advisory committee that are essentially recommendations that came from this body during that those discussions. It would dictate that the Commission on Higher Ed, actually the person who represents the commission would serve as the chair of that committee, the Teacher Loan Advisory Committee, and that the group, instead of meeting twice a year, would have to meet 4 times annually. And they would be not only establishing goals for the teacher loan program, but monitoring and reporting progress using recent program evaluation reports as a guide. It also goes further, asking this group to develop specific recommendations for changes necessary to statute, regulation, and or proviso to modernize and streamline the teacher loan program. If y'all recall, that's it's been around a while, and there's a lot of different alternatives for young people. Scholarships, this is a loan program that has a pretty significant, there's a lot of payback of the loan because folks that get the loan don't necessarily go in and go into teaching. Also, some of the other recommendations were to review and revise that program applications and submit a plan to the Commission for Higher Ed on implementing an online application process. Right now, it is still a paper application, so that's been a recommendation that the EOC has made the past 2 years. And also to add a question on the teacher loan program application that would designate whether an applicant is also a teaching fellow recipient. We have had that question come up among members, and we're not currently able to get that information because it's it's personal, PII, bless you, PII, and so this would put that in the proviso. And then there's also a piece for the Student Loan Corporation to provide audited financial statements for the TLP, which includes the revolving loan fund, and that's the fund that is paybacks for the teacher loan program, as well as sources of all charitable dollars to outside entities and the funding source that seeded the philanthropic arm of the Student Loan Corporation. Proviso revision request 1A.72 is also related to the Student Loan Corporation, and this is one that this committee made changes to last year to add with the revolving loan program funding to take up to 50% of that interest earned. The revision request is to take off the up to $5 million and just say up to 50% of the interest earned, investment earnings, and late fees in the program revolving account. And then last year, some of the changes, we actually went in and listed districts based on their vacancy rates, and this is this amendment request strikes that language and just leaves that up to the Department of Ed to identify the rural school districts for inclusion and loan forgiveness using data that documents the difficulty of districts in recruiting and retaining certified teachers. So it's not using a specific report and not listing out districts. It gives that to the Department of Ed. And also, the Student Loan Corporation would have to have both programs operational by the end of the fiscal year. And then I think, let me make sure I did not leave one out. No, I did not. So, okay. And I also want to add that Ray Jones is here from the Student Loan Corporation if there are any questions of him.
I know it's late, everybody's ready to go, but I did fail to share a couple of concerns by the committee. One, just our overall dollars in the IA spent on teacher recruitment and retention. We feel like they're high administrative costs, and it's unclear about the outcomes often for some of these programs. I got a call this morning. They said, you didn't include my teachers. And I said, well, how many did you produce last year? And they said 0. And I said, that's why I didn't include them. I mean, you know, it's like, and so therein lies some problems. EIA funds for South Carolina Youth Challenge. Currently, they get $1 million. There have been a lot of turnover in personnel there over the last several years. I've been in contact with the Adjutant General's second in command. I don't know the order of all those people, but they've offered for the EOC to meet with the Adjutant General, and I suggested I'm going to do a site visit. I'm going to go down there with the second in command from the Adjutant General and anybody else that wants to go. And we're going to do a site visit once they get personnel back in place. And then we're going to come back and meet with the Adjutant General. I'm hoping the governor's office will join us to make a recommendation back to this committee. So that will be probably the summer. We'll do the visits in the spring. Then the rural teacher recruitment proviso, we have some concerns, and we have an evaluation coming up on these incentives that are clear, and return on investment is difficult to show. So concerns about that. We'd also like to see an expansion of the current full-day 4K program. We only have one district that's not opted for full day, and I'm sure they're going to move over soon. But we'd also just like to expand 4K, find ways to expand 4K across the state. And then finally, just as a general statement, I've heard it here today, when you talk about report cards, or you talk about student performance, or you talk about data, you're talking about school leadership. And it's the responsibility of that school board to hire the right superintendent who then oversees those principals and does what they need to do with that district. It's really that district and school leadership that determines what happens at those schools. So that was just a general statement that we saw in a lot of our programs.
And just to tag on to that, the rural teacher recruitment incentive program review, we'll see that in June. So we're trying to put...
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
More clarity, more kind of...
That we expect there to be clarity.
That.
I cannot provide return on investment for every incentive.
Right.
I can up front, I can tell you that, because we can't identify the teachers. We can with many of them, the alt certification, international teacher. When we can identify a teacher, a name with that incentive, then we can do a closer return on investment. When it's something like web page upgrades, I don't know how many teachers that brought in. So.
Okay, so as this came from the subcommittee, we do not need a second. We just need a motion to approve and a vote. So is there a motion to approve? Both the recommendations for the EIA funding and the provisos that are included in here. Second. Oh, we don't need a second. Sorry, I just said that. All right, all in favor? All right.
Rainey,
All right, Michelle,
would you advance the slide? I just have one slide.
maybe turn that mic
Yeah.
off.
So, just coming up in 2026, we still, the joint retreat with State Board is still TBD. It looks like it might be spring now, just to get a firm date. So that's not going to be February, I don't think. Also, we are entering into the next phase of strategic planning beginning in 2026. Our current strategic plan ends in 2025. We have contracted out with Creative Leadership Solutions, and a former superintendent here in the Midlands, Christina Melton, is going to be helping us with that. And we're excited about that. So it's going to be sort of to your point, Ms. Pender, it's not going to be just like, here's your strategic plan, now go forth. We're going to have back and forth, and then we're going to stay accountable to that strategic plan. And I just wanted to make y'all aware of it and just let you know that we're still TBD in the joint retreat space. So thank you.
Okay. Before we accept a motion to adjourn, just happy holidays and Merry Christmas, and look forward to seeing you guys in 2026. And is there a motion to adjourn? All right. Merry Christmas.